Hey guys, welcome back to Release the Craftin. Priscilla here, with another episode of Storycraft, kind of. Kind of not. You may have already noticed immediately that there is no crafting being done. Well, unfortunately, I got a very firm discussion, a very firm warning from my doctor to actually rest my wrist for 2 weeks. So I won't be crafting for the next 2 weeks, which is a bit of ego death, because it's my life. But if I want to keep crafting, I gotta give my wrist a rest. So in light of that, I didn't have anything on the back burner prepared for Storycraft already, because I was so caught up doing Shabby Creep stuff that I actually wasn't ahead on my recording schedule like I usually am. So I had planned to, you know, go home from work and make my video and get this all together for you guys, but unfortunately my doctor was like, stop doing that, and I was like, okay, I hear that. So, this week, Storycraft is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be so much Storycraft as it's going to be Storycast, like a podcast, because I'm going to tell you the story because I already have it ready, and I don't want to lose this magical moment of having all the information in my brain, because I can't hold stuff like that for weeks on end. It's just going to fade away, and I'll never come back to it, and that's going to be really unfortunate because I've been wanting to tell this story for a very long time. So, in light of that, I'm going to tell you guys a story. You guys craft, and this will be a story craft. That's what I have concluded here. So, I'm not going to continue to string together a bunch of videos or anything like that. It's just going to fade to black, or maybe a logo. I haven't decided as of the recording of this. I don't know what the video is going to look like. But it's just going to be some noise for you guys, while I recuperate and rest my wrist. But I wanted to tell you guys this story, and I didn't want to skip Storycraft, so here we are. And if you have guessed by reading the, what's it called? The title of this video, I'm telling you guys the story of Hans my Hedgehog. Now you guys, Hans my Hedgehog is a German folktale, gathered at one point by the brothers Grimm themselves, which is where I first was exposed to it, but there's actually a couple different versions, and I've kind of smooshed them together in the way that I do to come up with the story that I'm going to tell you guys today. I love this story, and I can't really rationalize why, and you'll see, we'll talk about it more at the end of this, but this is like literally in my top 5 favorite like fairy tales, and I've been wanting to tell you guys a story forever, more so because I was talking to a friend and she had never heard this story, and I was like, wait, stop the presses, I have to tell this story. And it took me a bajillion years to get to it because I had a lot of other things going on. So here we are. I'm going to tell you guys the tale of Hans my Hedgehog. Hopefully you guys are crafting so that I can be crafting in spirit. But here we go. We're going to just get right into it. In the way long ago, as most things happen, there was a couple, a farmer and his wife, and they were actually moderately well off. They weren't a poor farmer and wife couple like we're used to. They were just, you know, moderately wealthy, doing fairly well on their little farm. They didn't want for anything, except the one thing they didn't have. Can you guess it? It's always the same thing. They wanted a child. They had everything they could ever possibly want except for a child, and they wanted it so badly that the wife was willing to go to great lengths, trying all sorts of remedies and folk like ideas, and even maybe a little bit of magic, you know, getting a little herbs in a pot and doing that kind of stuff to see if she could give birth to a child. But she wasn't the only person with baby fever. Her husband also had baby fever. He wanted a child as well, of course, to pass on his great legacy of this moderately wealthy farm. And it became such a point for him that every time he would go down to the village pub, he would, you know, start talking to his friends. They'd be chatting it up, and then he'd be like, oh, if I only had a child. And they'd be like, everything you got out there, all those cows, pigs, geese, whatever the hell else is on a farm, and you ain't got a kid? That's crazy. How are you the wealthiest man in the area without child when clearly your livestock know how to do it? Like, don't you know how to do it? So they gave this man a super hard time about not having a child, and that just was like a little stab in the gut, because he really wanted a kid, and he was doing his best with what he had and the tools that they had available at that time. So he was just like, okay, I don't even care. I don't even care care. It could be an ugly baby. It could be a fat baby. I don't care what this baby looks like. I just want a baby. Hell, this baby could be a hedgehog for all I care, but I want it. And, you know, wouldn't you guys know it? As luck would have it, his wife finally did get pregnant, and she gave birth. Do you know what she gave birth to, guys? Let me just, let's give you a moment to guess if you haven't figured it out already. She gave birth to a hedgehog. Not just any hedgehog, though. Okay, just like, it's not just a random hedgehog she gave birth to. No, no, no. She gave birth to a hedgehog-sized, so imagine tiny, hedgehog up top, little boy on the bottom. Yeah, so she gave birth to this hedgehog hybrid, the size of an actual hedgehog, so just a little fella. And fortunately for her, the spines on this little hedgehog were not super pointy or sharp or anything like that. They were actually as soft as hair. Very fortunately for her. So, she gave birth to a hedgehog boy, and the husband looked at it and was like, well, shit. And the wife looked at him and said, this is all your fault, Mr. I don't care if it's a hedgehog. And she looked at the baby and she was like, well, there's only one thing we can name him. So they named the baby Hans my Hedgehog. That's his full name. First, middle, last. Hans my Hedgehog. And turns out, guys, they weren't actually as grateful for this miracle baby as you might think. They were actually embarrassed. They couldn't bring this baby into town. People would ridicule them for having a hedgehog child, even though hedgehog up top, little boy on the bottom. It's very obvious that this hedgehog is at least part human. But yeah, nobody was like willing to let that slide. They ridiculed the couple mercilessly for having a hedgehog baby, which, like, after being ridiculed for not having a baby and then being ridiculed for having a hedgehog for a baby, you think they would just fucking move, because those people are the worst, or at least like stop interacting with them, because there's no pleasing in this crowd. This crowd is unwinnable. You're failing no matter what, and it's clearly that, well, they're just clearly jealous. So after a while, all this resentment starts to build up towards their hedgehog son, and they decide that they don't want anything to do with him. They're like, actually, we don't fucking want you. As much as we begged and prayed and hoped and pleaded that you would come along, we don't actually want you. So they end up just neglecting Hans, poor Hans, and he's fairly self-sufficient, fortunately, so he spends most of his time sleeping behind the stove. He's so tiny, he fits right back there, gets behind the stove and sleeps there for warmth, because they didn't, like, provide him with a bed or a bedroom or any of those things. They were like, you disgust us and we hate you, leave us alone. And that's what he did. He left them alone, and he would just stay behind the stove or wander among the farm animals in the day. He got along with them very well. The animals loved him very much, but unfortunately over time his father just got angrier and angrier as he resented the fact that he had a hedgehog for a son even more as the days went on, until one day a fair came to market, and he asked his wife, you know, what would you like me to bring you from the fair? And she told him that she would like a steak and some crackers and maybe some fluffy biscuits. And he was like, okay. And then he asked the housemaid, what she would like. And she asked for new shoes and stockings. And I'm like, get it, girl. If your employer goes, what do you want me to bring you from the market? Ask for the most expensive thing you possibly can, because an opportunity like this isn't going to come around every so often. And then after he had asked basically all the help around the house and his wife, he was like, well, I guess I'll ask my fucking hedgehog son what he wants. So he goes and he asks Hans, what do you want from the market, you wretched little creature? And Hans tells him, Father, I would really like a pair of bagpipes, my size, and I would like you to go to the blacksmith and ask him to make shoes for the rooster. And his dad is a little incredulous, but he's like, you know what? I don't even want to engage with you to find out why you need these weird random items, but okay. Yeah, sure, whatever. The maid asked for new stockings and, like, nice shoes, so I'm just being extra generous today. So the dad goes to the fair at the market. He picks up everything everybody asked for, and he brings it home. So the wife is very content with her nice delicacy of a steak and biscuits and crackers, and the maid is very happy with her new shoes and stockings. And then he just sort of tosses the bagpipe and the rooster shoes at Hans, and he goes, "Here you go, you wretched creature, get away from me." And Hans is so grateful. He says, "Thank you so much, father." And his dad has already walked away. He's like, "I don't want anything to do with you." So Hans, it turns out, isn't just self-sufficient, he's also great at self-teaching, because he ends up learning how to play the bagpipes. And he doesn't just play the bagpipes, you guys. He plays them beautifully. They're the beautifulest, most wonderfulest sounds coming from these bagpipes. They elicit all sorts of emotions. They make the heart swell with love and joy and hope, but they also fill you with a sense of melancholy and sadness and loneliness, because Hans himself is very lonely. While listening to this all day, every day, the father becomes even angrier, because now he has a useless hedgehog son who is very good at the bagpipes, but the bagpipes make him feel things, and he feels guilty for treating his son like shit, and that's apparently his son's fault. So Hans, on the other hand, is out there having the best time of his life, playing the bagpipes to all of his farm animal friends, and it turns out that the pigs are really, really keen on his bagpipe playing. So he's always followed around by some of the pigs on the farm who want to listen to him play the bagpipes. Him, the pigs, and the rooster, because the rooster also loves Hans. But the dad does not. And the mom is already, over it. She's checked out completely, so she's not even in the picture. She's just like, whatever, I have no son as far as I'm concerned. But the dad is like, okay, I've had enough of you. You're a foul little creature. All you do is play your bagpipes all day. You're useless. You're worthless. I hate you. And Hans is like, all right, well... That being said, since you made shoes for my rooster, father, I am going to leave, and I will be taking some of the pigs with me. And the dad's like, "Oh, are you taking the pigs with you?" And Hans gets onto the rooster after putting the little iron shoes on it. Or horseshoes. Yeah, horseshoes are made of iron. So rooster shoes are made of iron. So he puts the little iron shoes on the rooster. He jumps on its back. He grabs his little bagpipes and starts playing away, and he says, actually, as a matter of fact, I am taking some of the pigs with me. And the dad's like, okay, sure, yeah, whatever, I hate you, you're worthless, get gone. And Hans rides away on his rooster, and turns out the pigs just follow him. And not just the pigs, you guys, but a couple of cows, a couple of geese, a couple of sheep all follow Hans as he goes into the woods, and the dad's like, what the hell, those are mine. But no, they're actually Hans's now, because they loved Hans so much they didn't want to be without him. So Hans goes into the woods, and he spends his time playing his bagpipes and raising his animals until he has his own healthy supply of livestock, specifically, and most impressively, pigs. So a couple of years have gone by. Hans is living in the woods. He is a excellent pig farmer in the woods, which is amazing. And he's just living his best life. You know, he's a little sad, little lonely out there in the woods by himself, but he does have all of his animals for company, and they're getting along splendidly. And he spends his days playing the bagpipes and riding his rooster around. And this is business as usual until one day, Hans happens to hear the cries of some men in the woods, and he gets onto his rooster and he rides it around to see what all that noise is about. And while he's riding, he's playing his bagpipes to keep everybody around him really chill. And these men who are in the woods happen to be a king and his party, and they're lost, you guys. They're lost in these woods, and they hear the bagpipes, and the king tells one of his messengers to go check out what that bagpipe noise is. And the messenger runs off towards the noise, hears the bagpipes, looks up into a tree, and there is Hans on top of his rooster playing his bagpipes. And he's like, oh, okay. So he runs back to the king and he's like, you won't believe this, but I need you to believe it. There's a tiny hedgehog man on top of a rooster playing the bagpipes in the trees. And so the king's like, you're right, I don't believe this. And he readjusts his golden crown and heads off in the direction the messenger came from until he stumbles across Hans in his tree, and he's like, oh, it really is a little tiny hedgehog man. Interesting. And Hans is like, hello, welcome to my woods. What's going on? And the king's like, well, good hedgehog, sir. I'm actually lost and need to find my way back to my kingdom. Would you be able to help me? And Hans says, I'll be able to do more than help you. So he slaughters one of his pigs, it's how you get pork, guys. And he ends up roasting it over the fire for the king and his men. They have a great time. They're nice and warm and toasty. They're well fed. They get a good night's rest. And in the morning, Hans leads them out of the woods. And the king is so grateful that he, tips his golden crown to Hans and tells him, anything you want for helping me. I will give you anything you want. And Hans goes, I'm actually kind of lonely. Now that you mention it, out here by myself, I could really go for a wife. And the king's like, excellent, you will marry my daughter. Immediately. Yes, that's a great idea. And he heads back off to his kingdom. But the problem is, you guys, by the time the king gets back to his kingdom, King Goldcrown here, because he doesn't have a name, is realizing that his gratitude at being saved from being lost in the woods forever might have outweighed his actual willingness to give away his daughter to a hedgehog boy. So when he gets back to his kingdom, he tells his daughter about the whole arrangement, and she's like, gross, disgusting, yuck, I will never marry a hedgehog, you got me fucked up. And he's like, you know what, I got me fucked up, I'm not doing that either. So he tells all of his people that a hedgehog boy is supposed to come around in a year and a day to collect his daughter for marriage. They're not having that. They're not doing it. So when they see a hedgehog riding on a rooster, they need to kill it immediately. And the people are like, cool, great, yeah, we don't want to marry off our princess to a hedgehog anyways. Why would you make that deal, king? Weird call and judgment, but okay, like, whatever, we're just gonna go with it. So, a couple days go by in the woods, you guys. And you won't believe this, but another king is lost in the woods. This king, however, has a silver crown. Also no name, silver crown. And he's lost, and he comes across Hans playing his bagpipes on top of his rooster himself, and he's like, oh, what a delightful little fellow. And Hans says, well, welcome to my woods. How can I help you? And the king says, well, I'm actually lost, my good hedgehog. And I need to find my way back home. And Hans says, yeah, I can do that. Not a problem. What will you give me if I help you get back home? And the king is like, anything, honestly. And you can marry my daughter. And Hans thinks to himself, well, I already have a wife. I don't really need a second wife, but what's better than one wife? 2 wives. So Hans does the whole thing again. He wines, he dines, he plays his bagpipes all night. The king and his men are rested. Then he leads them out of the woods to the direction of their kingdom in particular. And the king is super grateful. He says, yes, absolutely, come by my house and a year from a day from now, pick up my daughter. She'll be more than happy to marry you. I'm just so thankful that we didn't die of exposure in the woods. And Hans is like, great, cool, excellent, what a good guy, what a nice guy. And he goes back into the woods, and the king gets back to his kingdom, and he's like, what the fuck was I thinking? I'm not marrying my daughter to a hedgehog. And his daughter's like, what? I'm sorry, did you say hedgehog? You're gonna marry me to a hedgehog? I won't marry a hedgehog. And he's like, no, we're not doing that. So the king tells his people, when you see a hedgehog right here on top of a rooster, kill him. Kill him immediately. Don't let him get up to the castle gates. Kill him dead. And so the people are like, excellent, cool, yeah, totally. And, they all just settle in to wait for Hans's eventual arrival. But crazily enough, funnily enough, you guys, after saving the Gold King and the Silver King, wouldn't you believe it, but there was a king who had a crown made of copper, who also happened to find himself lost and alone in the woods. He didn't have a retinue with him. So when he stumbled upon the bagpipe music and he happened upon Hans, our hedgehog, he was like, oh my gosh, good sir, could you help me out of these woods, please? I would be so grateful. Unfortunately, I'm also a very poor king. My kingdom is very poor, but I would be more than happy to give you anything in return for your assistance getting out of these woods. And Hans is like, yeah, okay, I'd be more than happy to help you get out of these woods, and I'll take you up on that offer. Just give me the first thing that greets you on your way home. Because in Hans's brain, he was like, I already got 2 wives. I can't ask this man for a 3rd wife. But I'll take whatever greets him first on the way home. So the king is like, excellent, cool, totally. Because the king is thinking, I have a dog that runs to meet me at the gates every time I return home. So I know that that dog is going to be the first thing that greets me, and I'm okay giving that dog away because I'm a cold, heartless asshole and I don't care about my dog. That being said, He spends a wonderful night with Hans. Hans leads him out of the woods, and the king heads home. And wouldn't you know it, you guys, but because the king had been lost in the woods for a couple of days longer than normal, the people were worried. But no one was more worried about the king than his daughter. So when she saw his copper crown gleaming in the sun coming out of the woods, she ran out of the castle, ran out of the gate. She actually beat the dog, because the dog hadn't seen the king yet. And she made her way to the king, and the king saw his daughter running towards him and was like, oh, shit. And, he embraces his daughter, of course, when she runs up to him, kisses her 1,000 times, and is just like, I'm so happy to see you again. And she's like, Papa, I missed you so much. Are you okay? And he's like, I am okay, but I have some bad news. I met a hedgehog in the woods, and not just any hedgehog, but this hedgehog was a man, but also a hedgehog. And the daughter's like, I don't follow, but go on, father. You might need some water. You sound dehydrated. But go on. And he tells his daughter that he met this hedgehog man, and the hedgehog man helped him out of the woods, but he promised that he would give the hedgehog man the first thing that greeted him, and unfortunately, it was his daughter. And his daughter listens to everything very carefully, and she's still a little convinced that her dad is maybe a little worse for wear, but she's like, you know what, father, if you made the promise, then I would be more than happy to honor it. It would be my honor to honor your promise. I love you that much. And he's like, okay, well, let's get everything ready, because this hedgehog is going to come collect within a year and a day. And unlike the rest of the kings that got help from Hans, this king tells his people, when you see a little hedgehog riding up to the kingdom on the back of a rooster, cheer for him. Throw flowers, celebrate, because he's coming to get married to my daughter. And the people are like, oh my god, the king has had a really rough time in those woods, but okay, sire, yeah, whatever you say, for sure. So, a year and a day goes by, and Hans sets out on his little rooster with his bagpipes a-playing towards the kingdom of the Gold King. And wouldn't you guys know it, but his entire pig army, because it's army size now, that's how many pigs he's managed to graze, follow him to the Gold King's kingdom. And when he gets there, the people do exactly as they were ordered, and they start attacking him. But Hans is on a rooster, and I don't know if you guys know this, but roosters can fly. So Hans's rooster jumps over the people who are throwing rocks and stones and trying to, like, kick him off the street. He flies right over it, right into the castle courtyard, right in front of the king and his daughter, and he's like, what the fuck? Aren't you going to honor your promise? You made a promise to me. And the king is like, oh shit. Well, since you're standing right in front of me and not dead, and I can see what looks to be an army beyond my castle gates, I guess I have to honor this promise. So his daughter throws a whole ass tantrum, you guys. She throws herself on the ground. She starts crying and kicking and screaming, and she's like, I won't, I won't, I won't. But they manage to get her up, get her dressed, and start to head her out of the kingdom. They're like, you go marry this hedgehog. And as, she's walking along and she's having a fit, she's still mad about it. She's cussing up a storm the whole way out the door, you guys. She is not wanting to marry Hans whatsoever. She's cussing up a storm about it, and Hans is riding his little rooster beside her, and he's like, won't you hold my hand? And she's like, gross, no, I'm never touching you. You're a disgusting little monster. And Hans is like, okay, yeah, okay. Bet. So Hans gets off his rooster, pushes her down into the mud in the ditch, so that her dress gets all covered in mud, and then, for the first time ever in his history, his little porcupine hedgehog spines finally get hard, so they're no longer as soft as hair. They're as sharp as any little sharp, pointy object could possibly be, like needles. And he uses them to rip up her dress, and she gets scratches all over her, and he says, there, since you and your father are horrible people who can't honor their promises, now you've paid the price. And I don't want you at all. Go back to your kingdom. You disgust me, because you're a promise breaker. And the princess gets up and runs all the way back to the castle, crying, as Hans rides on with his little pig army and his rooster mount. So they get to the second kingdom, the kingdom of silver, and the same thing happens. The people there try to attack him, they try to kill him, and they get a little bit stampeded by his pigs, and Hans uses his rooster's ability to fly over the gate into the castle grounds so he can confront the king directly, and he's like, hey, what the heck? You promised me a bride, and I'm here to collect. And the king's like, well, shit. Okay, yeah, here's my daughter. She'd be more than happy to marry you. And this daughter, has a different reaction. Instead of having an anger temper tantrum, she starts crying. And she cries the entire time. Her maids get her dressed. They put her in a pretty white dress. They get her into a carriage. And Hans rides his little rooster beside the carriage on out the door. This king was a little bit more to his word. He loaded up the cart full of gold and jewels and the proper dowry you would expect for a princess, and sends her on the way. And as they're riding away, the princess has been crying the entire time, and she won't stop crying, to the point where Hans comes up to the window of the carriage, and he's like, won't you stop crying? And she's like, no, I don't want to marry you. You're hideous, and you're ugly, and this isn't what I want at all. So Hans is like, oh, so you're not going to keep your promise? And she says, no, I will never, ever, ever be your bride. And she continues to cry, and Hans gets into the carriage, and his spikes get all spiky again, and he shreds up her dress and uses his spines to poke her over, like on a bunch of 100 places, so now she has a bunch of little tiny, tiny poke wounds. And as she's bleeding, he jumps out, gets back on his rooster, turns her carriage around, and sends her back to her kingdom in a sobbing, bloody mess, and proceeds to shout after her that her and her father are promise breakers, and just like the first king, he'll have their kingdom too in return for them breaking their promises. So he takes his little pig army, and he goes on to the third king. Now, when he gets to the kingdom of the third king, Hans is a little tense because the last two kings tried to kill him, so he's prepared to get, like, murdered again, but he is overwhelmed by the joy that the people express when they see him riding up. They're throwing flowers and rice, they're having, like, a whole parade. Everybody is congratulating him, they're offering him presents as he's going up to the gate. He's getting this huge, like, royal welcome for showing up on his little rooster with his pig army in tow. And when he goes inside, the princess is already ready. She's in her wedding dress, ready to go. The king is like, oh my gosh, there's my little friend, there's Hans, welcome to my kingdom, here's my daughter, she's excited to meet you. And Hans is sufficiently impressed, you guys, sufficiently impressed, and he's like, oh. So he dismounts off his rooster, and he goes up to the princess, and he shakes her hand with his little tiny hand, and she's like, hi, I'm so excited to meet you. I would love for you to be my husband. Let's get married. So they get married at that moment, immediately. They're married. There's a marriage ceremony. There's a big party afterwards, a big feast, and during the feast, Hans and the princess spend all their time talking and getting to know each other, and she tells him that her father told him about how beautifully he plays the bagpipes, so he gets his bagpipes and he plays for her, and basically, you guys, they spend all night just sitting up talking to each other, playing music together, because the princess is also musically gifted. I don't know what she plays. Let's say she plays a lute. That sounds nice. And, you know, they spend all night having like a jam session, getting to know each other, and it turns out not only are they husband and wife, but they're kind of in love. So in the morning, after they spent the entire night talking to each other, the king sees how well they're getting on, and he's actually a little relieved because he was like, I don't know how this hedgehog man and my little girl are going to get along together, but they get along swimmingly. And the king is so impressed that he tells Hans that he'd be more than willing to give him his copper crown. And Hans is like, oh, hold on a second, I have some stuff to do. So Hans gets back on his rooster, and he rides away with his pig army, and playing the bagpipes the entire time. He uses his pig army to invade the Silver Kingdom so he can take the Silver King's crown. So he deposes the Silver King. And then he does the same thing at the Gold King's kingdom. He overthrows them. And then he returns to the Copper Kingdom with a crown of gold and a crown of silver, and tells the Copper King that their kingdom has now become 3 times as large because he has managed to procure these 2 fine crowns, and now those kingdoms belong to him, and he's giving them to the Copper King, his new father-in-law. And the Copper King is like, what? And he said, you won't be poor anymore. This kingdom won't be poor anymore. This I'm presenting to you. A larger, more powerful, more wealthy kingdom. And the Copper King is so impressed that he's like, no, you're the king now. Like, I couldn't do that. You did that, my friend. And the Copper King willingly gives Hans his crown. So Hans becomes, no longer is known by the moniker of Hans my Hedgehog. He is now Hans of the Three Kingdoms. So Hans of the Three Kingdoms begins to settle into a lovely routine with his wife where they spend all their time talking and chatting it up, and Hans is no longer feeling lonely, and he decides that what he's going to do is take half of his pigs, sell them, and give that wealth to his parents because he did take their pigs after all. So he does that, and when the royal carriage rolls up to his old farm, and his mother and father see this royal carriage, they're like, oh my god, the king is coming. And who walks out? Little tiny Hans of the Three Kingdoms. And he presents all the riches, which is a lot of riches because he had a lot of pigs, to his family. And he says, here you go, mother, father, I am returning what I took from you. And they're flabbergasted and shook, and for the first time the father feels properly regretful at how he treated Hans, and Hans doesn't care because Hans gets back in that carriage and he leaves. So good for Hans. You don't have to like fuck with the people who abused you. And he goes back to the kingdom, and him and his wife are having a grand old time together, right? Like I said, they're wealthy. They have a pig army still. They have a huge kingdom. Hans is actually a really great king. There's only one problem. He's still a hedgehog. And he looks at his wife and he's like, we've been together for a while and things are going great. And she's like, yeah, I agree. Like, I'm really enjoying this relationship. You know, we're really good friends. And he's like, yeah, we are good friends. Let me tell you what, wife. Tonight, I'm gonna sleep in your bedchamber. And she's like, oh, you've never done that. That's interesting. You're still a hedgehog, though. How does that work? And he's like, let me tell you how it works. I'm gonna come to your bedchamber, and you have to leave the room dark. Everything has to be dark. But you have to have a fire going, and it has to be hot. Like a hot, hot fire. And she's like, okay, I can work with that. Put some curtains up, blow out the candles, and just have the fireplace going. Gotcha. And he's like, and what I'm going to do is take my hedgehog skin off. And she's like, say what? You're going to do what? And he said, and what you need to do is before you see me, you need to burn my skin. You can't look at me, but you got to burn that skin, and you got to burn it fast. Otherwise, I'll just crawl back into it and be stuck as a hedgehog forever. And she's like, oh, so you're going to take your hedgehog skin off in my bedroom, but I can't look at you, but then I have to get up and grab your skin as fast as possible and throw it into the fire and burn it without looking at you, even though you just took it off in front of me? And then you won't be a hedgehog anymore? And he said, yes, that's correct. Because I've been enchanted, so I'm stuck like this, and this is the only way to break the enchantment. So she's like, okay, alright. Why don't you come into my room, put your hedgehog skin on the chair by my bed, and maybe we can work this out. So Hans is like, okay, great. They have a plan, you guys. So that night, Hans does what he says. He goes to her room. Everything is dark except for the crackling fire. It's very, very dark because it's a very big room, right? And the princess is in one corner as far off as possible because she doesn't want to break this special ritual by looking at Hans. And Hans takes his hedgehog skin off and he tosses it onto the chair by the bed. And as soon as she hears it hit the chair, the princess turns around, she snatches it up, tosses it into the fire, and she stares at that fire until it burns to a cinder. And there is not a single quill left in that fireplace. And as soon as the last quill turns into ash, Hans flings open the curtains so that she can see him in the moonlight, and turns out, you guys, Hans is a beautiful young man. And not just like a little pretty, but like big pretty. You know, like he had the biggest glow up, I think, in recorded history, kind of pretty. And the princess is flabbergasted. She's wooed, she's wowed, she's awed, because her husband is so goddamn attractive. And she's like, hot damn. And he's like, I know, right? This whole time. Right here, underneath that skin. And, yeah, you guys, in addition to, living happily ever after, you know they fucked. And that's the end of the story. Hans my Hedgehog and the princess settle down and have a wonderful life for the rest of their lives. And I guess she's no longer a princess at this point. She'd be a queen. So go off, queen. Get your man. And that's the end of the story, you guys. That is all of Hans my Hedgehog. And I have been dying to tell this story because I love this story so much because Hans is a little jerk. He's a little jerk. Like, I know everything in his life has been really bad and really shitty, but he treats those two girls so poorly for being upset at promises made for them by their fathers. And granted, he also gets revenge on their fathers eventually at some point, but he abuses the life out of those girls for not wanting to fulfill some other person's promise to him, which is not their responsibility. And for some reason, like, the knowledge that Hans is, like, this really good guy who's really good with animals and also really good at running a kingdom, but also really nice to the princess that does choose him. Like, he's such a nice little guy. He's also a little guy, but he's also the biggest jerk. Like, this interesting sense of, like, moral justice, where he's just like, how dare you break a promise to me? As if nobody has ever broken a promise to him in their entire lives. Like, the initial promise that was broken to him of being, like, birthed into the world by his parents, who should have been taking care of him, they broke that promise by being total assholes to him, but he was like, no, I don't have hard feelings about that. It's these two guys in particular who have scorned me that I'm taking entirely personally. And fortunately, he still ended up with a wife at the end of the day either way. But I don't know, like, I just love this story. It's wacky, it's bonkers, and I love the idea of a little tiny hedgehog guy sitting on top of a rooster, giving everybody sass and guff and being like, yeah, I'm a cool guy, so what? Like, I love it. I love it so much. I would recommend, if you have never been exposed to Jim Henson's Storyteller, to look it up on YouTube. There's actually, if I remember, I'll link it in the description box, but there's actually a full episode of Hans my Hedgehog, and the costume that they make for Hans my Hedgehog is brilliant. Like, I'm sad that it was only used one time because it's such a good costume, but also terrifying. They make him like a feral beast, a la like Beauty and the Beast style. So I know some of you guys will be into that, but like, it's a little bit upsetting, but also like, I can see why some of you guys would be into that, I'm not gonna lie. But the baby version, terrifying. Absolutely nightmare fuel. But the story itself is really cute. It's really well done. Jim Henson's Storyteller is a gem. It's got so many, like, famous actors in it, but I remember that episode in particular, and I have loved this story since I first saw that episode, probably when I was, like, 4 or 5, like, really dating myself here, but, like, I was a tiny, tiny person when I saw these for the first time, and I loved it ever since, and I have never forgotten how Hans looks from that time to now. Like, I watched it again and was like, yep, that's exactly what I remember. And it has John Hurt in it, you guys. He's the storyteller. It's freaking brilliant. Also, Brian Henson plays the dog, like the storyteller's dog, and he's the same guy who does the voice for Hoggle in Labyrinth, and I can't unhear that when I listen to the dog talk, so I'm just like, oh, it's like Hoggle reincarnated as a dog. Brilliant. But no, it's a beautiful gem. I love it. I love this story. It's so bonkers. It's just a good time. It's just a good time. So yeah, this has been Storycast. I might do this again next week too, because like 2 weeks, right? So let me know if there's like a particular story you want to hear as a podcast type deal. Somebody has asked me in the past to turn Storycraft into a podcast, and I have like debated with using that as an idea after I hit my 100 episode mark to turn it into just like a me telling you fairy tales podcast thing, which I might do because I still want to share the stories, but I don't know if I want to keep making all the videos to go with it after I hit 100, which is my personal goal. So yeah, it's something I've dabbled with. I just didn't think I'd be doing it so soon, but here we are. So yeah, that's gonna be it from you guys. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate your faces. I hope that you were able to craft along with me at least. And like I said, if you have any requests, leave them in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Until then, happy crafting. Bye.